Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're making a spice rack. Ooh, something spicy. All of the best projects in the world start with a block of white oak, and most of this is just scrap that I have lying around. It's like 2¼ by 3" by however long you want your spice rack to be. I ended up figuring mine, I wanted about 6 shelves, and so I put the bottles on there and figured out how big the shelves need to be to leave a little bit of space so that the bottles can come out, and then multiplied it by 6, add a little bit more onto either end, and that's what we got. So what I'm going to do is actually start by figuring out how wide the shelves need to be. And to figure out how wide they are, I figure out my bottles, and I want 5 bottles per shelf, so 5 times the width of a bottle, plus a little bit of wiggle room, and then plus I want to have sliding dovetails. So I add all those together, and that gives me the length of each shelf. And then at that point, it really doesn't matter exactly how long it is, but I want them all to be precisely the same length. So I'm going to cut one of them to a length, and I'm going to use that as my stick to measure all of the others off. And then I can shoot them down until they are all precisely the same length. And I want to get them to feel so that if you stack them all up, there's a nice smooth edge from one onto the other. Now we're going to make these sliding dovetails on the end of this. So I'm going to put a mark in about 1/4 inch. So they're going into 3/4 inch material with a 1/4 inch sliding dovetail. And then I'm going to bring in my dovetail saw because, of course, we're making dovetails. It really doesn't matter what you're doing with these fine saws. If you have something that works well, that's all you need. And then I'm going to cut down in little ways. How deep do I cut down? Something around 1/8 inch. I eyeballed it. None of my tails match. They're all ever so slightly different. Gives a good chance to experiment and play with things. And then I'm going to come in with the chisel, put it right into the corner of the wood, and then just rock it back and forth until I get down to the depth of the cut. That gives me my tail. So now I need to figure out where I want to put all of these sliding mortises, the dovetail, I guess it would be the pin side into it. And in this case, I need to figure out how tall these need to be. So I put my first shelf to be right about there. And then I figure out I need enough space so that I can tip the bottle out. So how far down can I put the next shelf but still be able to tip the bottle out? And so I put this on here and started laying out from that point, and then I realized it's not exactly where I wanted it, and I ended up marking tick marks like 4 or 5 times until I got the shelf spacing exactly what I wanted. And then I could lay off one shelf into the other and then multiply it by 6 and put those marks along the board. I'm going to keep both of the 2 sideboards in the vise so that all of the marks and measurements are perfectly transferred from one to the other. It's very important that all the marks on these boards correspond, otherwise your shelves aren't going to be parallel to each other, or they might be off at a weird angle. So and this actually took me a little bit longer than it should have because I was just playing with it. My bottles are that long, but I still need enough space so I can rotate them forward. They need to be able to come out and get past the front strip that I have on there. And there's just a little bit of wiggling to make them fit. I want to make them as small and compact as possible, but they still need to be able to slide in and out. And once we get all those marks on there, then I can move them down. I think I had to put a shelf every 5½ inches. And so I put the mark of the bottom of every shelf along there, and then I put the board on to actually measure out where they need to be. Also, I'm going to have this strapping going across the front. It's a piece of hickory I had left over from some trim work a while ago. Hickory is a really nice flexible wood, and for thin material like this, it works out really well. The other nice thing about hickory is you can make it look like oak. Hickory can really, really look like oak. First thing I want to do is actually take out these sections where the hickory strip is going to recess in. And I'm going to keep these 2 boards together so that I can cut basically just a little groove or a dado for that to slide down into. To cut all of them the exact same depth, I'm going to put a piece of tape on my saw and use that as a depth stop so I can cut down on either side of the dado down to the depth. And then once I have all of those cuts cut in on both sides, then I can come in with the router and pare them down to the final depth. I'm actually going to make them ever so slightly less deep than the thickness of my straps. That way I can plane the straps down flush with the final surface. It's a little easier to do that than to plane the boards down flat to the struts. But you could do it either way. I guess the best way would be to make them absolutely perfectly identical, but that's not always possible. To get that final perfect fit, I actually had to make them a little bit wider. So I just come in with a chisel and pare them back until the straps fit in there exactly. Once one is done, rinse and repeat 5 more times. So we ended up making 5 of these strips all the way up, spaced 5.5 inches apart. And each of these are 3/4 of an inch above the top of the shelf. And so these will stop the bottles from falling off of the shelf, theoretically. And so when one's done, then you march on to the next and on to the next. And I found it easier just to go and cut all of the side slots first and then come through and clean them all out. That way you're doing one operation at a time. And as long as you keep these boards locked in the vise, they work out pretty well to give you exactly what you want. I found that taking out the majority of the waste is a little bit faster with the chisel, and then you bring in the router plane to be that final cut. That way the router plane is always set at the same depth, so you can make them all precisely the exact same depth rather than adjusting the router plane up and down for each one. And you can really take out most of the cut with a chisel very, very quickly. So now it is on to the dovetails, and I need to mark out where the slides need to be. Now we're marking out where the top and bottom of the actual shelf need to be, but that's not the mark I need on the board. I need the inside size of the dovetails, so the pinched section. Once I get those marks transferred on, then I can cut them across. And I'm going to be using a sash saw here, and I'm eyeballing the angle to match closely. We'll be able to come back and trim it out. And I like to make one cut down the middle that will actually create a relief area so that when I chop them, they do split out. I'm going to start by one side, putting the chisel right into that knife line and paring it down to the end. And with a good bevel edge chisel, you can actually get right up into those dovetail slides. I'm going to get them close to where I think they should be and get everything to be right about right and see if it works. And eventually you get to the point where it slides in halfway. Great, well, we're halfway there. Now I can turn the board around and do the same thing again from the other side. And then once I have that done, then we can do it 11 more times. 6 shelves, 2 per side. Yeah, it's a good way to get good at doing sliding dovetails. You're going to have to work at it, and eventually they all slide in and get a decent fit. Some of them weren't perfect. Some of them have a little bit of gap here and there, but most of them actually ended up working really well. And you can see how these will all then fit along the side rails. And then eventually we'll have them so that they can fit into both sides. I'm going to be using hide glue for putting them in because, number one, hide glue gives me a little bit more working time so I can play with it. And number two, it allows me to have a little bit more flexibility. It also, the gap filling makes it so I can hide those gaps a little better because the glue is finish friendly. For the slats, I'm just using a normal wood glue. I like to use Elmer's Wood Glue Max. You can see how they'll fit into those slots. And I cut all of the strapping just a little longer than it needed to be. It was nice that it was all right about the right size I need to be, so I could just cut it to length and stick them in. And then we're going to clamp it all together. For the sliding dovetails, no clamping is needing, but for the strapping, I needed 1 per end, and so that means 12 hand screw clamps. Now, the last thing I had left over is the side panels I left long. Probably should have cut them off beforehand, but I didn't think about that. I was getting a little excited about gluing up, and so I had to come back through and cut them off. So I'm going to cut them to length and then put a little 45-degree detail on the corner of each one. And from this point on, it's just the final smoothing, detailing, and cleaning up. Need to flush everything up on the face so we can come in with a plane and it kind of traverse. I have it at a 45-degree angle, so I'm doing both grains running along it. Just being a little careful not to try and tear out. If it really gets difficult, then I can always bring in a card scraper. And this gets me very, very close to the edge. I'm also going to be doing a good bit of chamfering around the corners, particularly along the long sides. I want to make sure that I have the nice detail on it because this is kind of a boxy design, but with cutting off the corners, if you chamfer it all, it actually gives a pretty decent look. Plus, if any of those staves are sticking out too long, this long chamfer then brings them back. And I'm actually going to make the chamfer go down as far as the stave is tall. So you can see some of that end grain. And I kind of like the way that looks. And for this, basically, I could have just come in with a card scraper and had it ready for finish, but I decided to use some sandpaper on this, mostly because I'm going to be using a boiled linseed oil to add coloring to it. And the sanding will actually draw in the oil a little deeper. It kind of wicks it down into the pores that get clogged with the sandpaper. And I really like the way it looks with white oak. It really brings out the contrast in between the ray and the grain. It makes it pop, especially with the hickory. It kind of makes the two match and look fairly similar. The hickory has a little bit more character and darkness in some of the streaks, but coloring-wise, they're very, very similar. The problem with boiled linseed oil is it's not very protective. So normally I'd put the boiled linseed oil on, let it soak up as much as it wants, and then wipe off the excess, and then eventually add paste wax. And for most of my hand tools, that's what I do. But for this one, I want a little bit more protection. So I'm going to use a wipe-on poly. I had thought about using the Rubio Monocoat, but all of my cabinets upstairs are finished with a wipe-on poly. And since this is right next to them, I wanted that finish to be very, very similar. So 5 coats of poly with sanding in between the last 2 coats. And that's pretty much all it needs. It's a pretty straightforward finish on there. Now, for mounting it to the wall, I thought about a whole bunch of different things. I was thinking about putting picture hangers in the back or something like that. But I thought, I'm just going to put in some screws and countersink it. And I thought, oh, great, I've got some brass screws that'll look nice. But I couldn't find them. So in the end, I found these zinc coated that are not too bad. They're not gorgeous, but they work well. So I can set those on there and just tap them, and they'll put a mark exactly into the drywall so that I can put in an anchor to fit them in. And so I'm using anchors to go and hold onto the drywall, and those will be more than strong enough to hold the spice rack. Would it hold me climbing on it? No. But will it hold a bunch of spices? Yes. These actually work pretty well. They expand behind the drywall, and they're incredibly strong. So we can drive those in, and that's that. The spice rack is up. We just need to add some spices to it, put the cabinet doors back on, and we've got ourselves a spice rack. Yay, happiness. It's nice to have all of these accessible rather than in a shelf or a drawer, and I can see what I have and what I need to get, and I'm really, really happy. So now it's time for me to go do some more cooking. Happiness. So there you have it. A really simple project. This is just a lot of fun, a great way to practice dovetails and to just make something a little nice. I wanted something that would fit in here and still be able to open and close the cabinet, but still be able to see all the spices, a little bit of space to grow. I really like how this came out. It was really only a few hours in the shop and make a good weekend project, and it's a good way to do it. I thought about putting plans out for this, but it's something that's so specific to your spice bottles that it just wouldn't be very useful for that. So measuring your spice bottles, you can figure out what your dimensions are. Height, width, space between bottles, and it's all pretty straightforward. It's a good way to use a lot of scrap in the shop and just have a little bit of fun trying something new. There are thousands of different ways I could have done this with attaching it to the walls and other mounting going onto this, and I just want to do something a little simple. So I kind of like this, and if I don't like it, then I can move it somewhere else. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What should I do differently on this? Is there something that I could rethink and try differently next time? Let me know that down below. And that does actually help out the channel. Anytime you hit like, comment, share, subscribe, those things do help. They get us in front of more people, they help the channel to grow, and they get this algorithm going here on YouTube. So thank you for that. It does mean a lot. If you want to take it one step farther, there are a bunch of people whose names are scrolling over here. They are the patrons on Patreon. Without patrons or members here on this channel, we wouldn't exist. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewer. So if you want to find out more about that, there's links to Patreon in the description down below, or you can click the little join button down there and become a member here on YouTube. We have special perks for both and behind the scenes videos and things like that. So if you like that, let us know. And I think that'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye. You know, there are projects you can make in your shop when you don't have a lot of time, but this one actually requires a certain amount of time.